The Kingsworth Hotel, downtown's crown jewel, gleaming like a fortress of wealth and power. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across marble floors so polished you could see your reflection. Tonight, the Grand Ballroom hosts the most exclusive event of the year, the annual Investor Gala for Hayes Luxury Properties. We're talking about a company that just posted record-breaking profits of $2.8 billion. The guest list reads like a who's who of the business elite: senators, Fortune 500 CEOs, oil barons, tech moguls, and real estate titans who collectively control more wealth than some small countries. But here's where our story begins, and trust me, you've never heard anything quite like this. Through the revolving gold-plated doors walks a man in an impeccably tailored midnight blue Tom Ford tuxedo. His cufflinks catch the light, pure platinum with embedded diamonds. This is Elliot Hayes, 38 years old, and worth $4.2 billion. Yes, billion with a B. But here's what makes Elliot different from every other person in that room. He built his empire from absolutely nothing. 15 years ago, Elliot was sleeping in his beat-up Honda Civic, showering at truck stops and cold-calling property owners from the parking lots of McDonald's. He had exactly $417 to his name and a business plan scribbled on napkins. Today, Hayes Luxury Properties owns more premium real estate than any other company on the East Coast. We're talking Manhattan penthouses, Hamptons estates, Miami beachfront towers, properties so exclusive that most people can't even afford to look at the listing photos. But as Elliot steps into that ballroom, something feels immediately wrong. The usual buzz of networking conversations seems to pause. Heads turn. Eyes narrow. Instead of the respectful nods and eager handshakes he typically receives, there's something else in the air tonight. Something cold. Something hostile. Now, Elliot isn't naive. He's faced discrimination before, subtle and not so subtle reminders that some people still can't believe a black man could build an empire this massive. But tonight feels different. Tonight feels coordinated. He moves through the crowd, recognizing faces he's seen in boardrooms for years. There's Margaret Sinclair, Senior Vice President of Acquisitions, a woman whose salary Elliot personally approved just last month. She's standing with Thomas Bradford, Head of International Development, and Janet Morrison, Chief Financial Officer. These aren't strangers. These are his employees. His leadership team. People who send him quarterly reports and attend his strategy meetings every Tuesday morning. But instead of approaching him with the usual business updates or investment opportunities, they're clustering together, whispering, glancing in his direction with expressions that range from confusion to outright disdain. Elliot notices other groups forming similar patterns, huddles of well-dressed executives stealing glances and engaging in hushed conversations. Then it happens. From the largest group of executives emerges Richard Collings. Now, Richard is someone you need to understand. He's 52 years old, inherited his position at a competing firm from his father, and has never closed a deal worth more than $50 million in his entire career. But Richard carries himself like royalty, with that particular brand of arrogance that comes from being born into wealth rather than earning it. Richard approaches Elliot with a swagger that immediately draws attention from nearby groups. His voice cuts through the ambient music and conversation, deliberately loud enough to ensure maximum audience participation in what's about to unfold. "Excuse me, sir," Richard says, his tone dripping with condescension, "but I think you might be at the wrong event tonight." Elliot stops mid-stride. The conversations around them begin to die down as people sense drama brewing. "I'm sorry," Elliot responds, his voice calm but questioning. Richard's smile widens, and you can practically see him savoring the moment. This is a private gathering for business executives and investors. It's invitation only, and quite frankly, I don't recall seeing you on the guest list. Now, here's where the story gets absolutely insane. Elliot reaches into his jacket pocket and pulls out his phone. Not to argue, not to cause a scene, but to show Richard the digital invitation that clearly displays Elliot Hayes, CEO, Hayes Luxury Properties, as the evening's keynote speaker and guest of honor. But before Elliot can even unlock his phone, laughter begins rippling through the crowd. First, it's Richard's chuckle, then Margaret Sinclair's nervous giggle, then a full chorus of amusement from executives who should know exactly who they're looking at. "Oh, that's Rich," calls out someone from the back of the group. The CEO of Hayes Luxury Properties? Sure, and I'm the Pope. Another voice chimes in. Did the catering companies send their people through the front door tonight? The laughter grows louder, more confident, more cruel. Thomas Bradford, the head of international development, a man whose salary Elliot increased by 30% just 6 months ago, steps forward with a theatrical bow. Your Majesty, he says mockingly, perhaps you could show us to the kitchen? I believe they're running low on champagne. This is when Elliot realizes what's happening. This isn't mistaken identity. This isn't even unconscious bias. This is deliberate humiliation. These people know exactly who he is, but they've decided that a black man, or regardless of his wealth, achievements, or position, doesn't belong in their world. Margaret Sinclair, emboldened by the group's energy, adds her voice to the chorus. Seriously though, how did hotel security miss this? This is supposed to be a secure event. And that's when Richard Collings delivers the final blow. Don't worry, everyone. I'll handle this. He pulls out his own phone and dials hotel security. Yes, we have a situation in the grand ballroom. Someone who clearly doesn't belong here has made it past your screening. Can you please send someone up to escort him out? The crowd watches with anticipation, phones beginning to emerge from purses and jacket pockets. In the age of social media, public humiliation has become entertainment, and everyone wants to capture their piece of the show. Elliot stands there, surrounded by his own employees, being treated like an intruder at his own company's celebration. But here's what nobody in that room understands yet. They've just made the biggest mistake of their professional lives. Within minutes, 2 hotel security guards arrive. They're polite but firm, clearly following orders from someone they believe has authority. Sir, we're going to need you to come with us, one of them says, placing a gentle but unmistakable hand on Elliot's arm. And here's the part that will absolutely blow your mind. Elliot doesn't resist. He doesn't shout about who he is. He doesn't demand to speak to managers or threaten lawsuits. He simply nods, straightens his tie, and allows himself to be escorted from the ballroom while dozens of phones capture every second of his apparent humiliation. As the doors close behind him, the crowd erupts in satisfied chatter. Richard Collings is being congratulated for his quick thinking. Margaret Sinclair is already posting about the evening's unexpected entertainment on her social media. Thomas Bradford is regaling nearby investors with exaggerated versions of what just happened, painting himself as a hero who helped maintain the event's exclusivity. But what none of them know, what they're about to discover in the most shocking way possible, is that Elliot Hayes doesn't just own Hayes Luxury Properties. He owns 80% of the shares. Which means he doesn't just work there. He doesn't just run the company. He is the company. And every single person who just humiliated him, every executive who laughed, every manager who mocked, every senior vice president who stood by and watched, they all work for him. Their paychecks, their benefits, their company cars, their stock options, their entire professional existence depends entirely on one person, the man they just had thrown out of his own party. If you believe no one should be judged by their skin color or underestimated for their success, please subscribe to Touching Boss Stories channel, because you'll want to hear what Elliot did next, and trust me, it's going to change everything you think you know about revenge. If you were Elliot, would you have confronted them right there in front of everyone, or would you have waited for the perfect moment to strike back when they least expected it? Standing outside the Kingsworth Hotel, Elliot Hayes looks up at the glittering windows of the grand ballroom where his tormentors are still celebrating their victory. The cool night air carries the faint sound of music and laughter from 40 floors above, the sound of people who think they've just won the biggest game of their lives. But Elliot isn't angry. He isn't shouting into the night or plotting dramatic confrontations. Instead, he's doing something far more dangerous. He's thinking. And when a man worth $4.2 billion starts thinking strategically, empires can crumble overnight. He pulls out his phone, not to call a lawyer, not to contact the media, but to dial a number that's about to change everything. The phone rings twice before a crisp, professional voice answers. Good evening, Mr. Hayes. I wasn't expecting your call tonight. This is Sarah Chin, Elliot's executive assistant, but that title doesn't begin to capture what she actually does. Sarah is the orchestrator of an empire, The person who knows every contract, every employee file, every board resolution, and every legal clause that keeps Hayes Luxury Properties running. She's also working late tonight, because when you manage a billionaire's schedule, 9 to 5 doesn't exist. Sarah, Elliot says, his voice eerily calm, I need you to pull up the termination protocols we discussed last quarter. The ones for immediate dismissal without severance. There's a pause on the other end of the line. Sarah Chun doesn't ask questions when Elliot uses that tone of voice. She's worked for him for 8 years, and she's learned to recognize the difference between regular business decisions and nuclear options. How many files, Mr. Hayes? 17, Elliot responds, and then he begins reciting names. Names of people who are currently toasting their success 40 floors above his head. Richard Collings from Meridian Group. I want his consulting contract terminated immediately. Margaret Sinclair, Thomas Bradford, Janet Morrison. Now, here's where this story gets absolutely incredible. What the partygoers don't know is that Elliot's rise to billionaire status wasn't just about buying and selling properties. It was about creating a web of interconnected business relationships that spans the entire luxury real estate industry. Hayes Luxury Properties doesn't just compete with other firms, it provides essential services to them. Consulting contracts, joint venture agreements, exclusive listing partnerships, financing arrangements. Elliot's company has its fingers in every major deal that happens in the city. Richard Collings's firm? They rely on Hayes Luxury Properties for international client referrals worth over $200 million annually. Margaret Sinclair's acquisition department? 60% of their successful deals come through Hayes partnerships. Thomas Bradford's international development division? They literally can't operate without Hayes's overseas connections. But it gets even better. Remember, tonight's gala isn't just for Hayes Luxury Properties. It's a joint industry event, which means many of the people mocking Elliot are directly employed by companies where Elliot holds significant influence, board positions, or investment stakes. As Elliot continues naming names, Sarah is already pulling up files on her computer. What she sees makes her understand exactly why her boss is using the nuclear option tonight. Mr. Hayes, she says carefully, some of these individuals are senior executives at companies where we have major partnerships. Terminating these relationships will cost us approximately $40 million in immediate revenue. Sarah, Elliot responds, sometimes the cost of maintaining your dignity is more valuable than $40 million. Execute the terminations. All of them. Tonight. But Elliot isn't done. His next call is to Marcus Williams, head of security for Hayes Luxury Properties. Marcus is a former Secret Service agent who takes his job very seriously, and when Elliot explains what just happened, Marcus's professional demeanor cracks slightly. They did what? Marcus's voice carries a combination of disbelief and barely controlled anger. Mr. Hayes, with your permission, I'd like to personally escort you back into that building. Permission granted, Elliot says. But Marcus? I don't want you to say a word to anyone until I give the signal. Can you arrange for the hotel's head of security to meet us in the lobby? Within minutes, a very different Elliot Hayes walks back through the gold-plated doors of the Kingsworth Hotel. This time, he's flanked by 2 men in perfectly tailored suits who move with the controlled precision of professional bodyguards. This time, the hotel's head of security, a man who's already received a very enlightening phone call from the building's management company, is waiting with profuse apologies and a keycard for the executive elevator. You see, the Kingsworth Hotel isn't just hosting tonight's event. Hayes Luxury Properties owns the building. Elliot Hayes is literally the landlord. As the elevator rises toward the grand ballroom, Elliot's phone is buzzing constantly. Sarah Chin is executing the most comprehensive professional assassination in corporate history. Emails are being sent. Contracts are being terminated. Legal notices are being filed. And most importantly, a very special guest list is being prepared for hotel security. But here's the masterstroke. And this is why Elliot Hayes is a billionaire instead of just another successful businessman. He's not just firing people or ending contracts. He's creating a lesson that will reshape the entire industry. The elevator doors open, and Elliot steps back into the grand ballroom. But this time, everything is different. This time, he belongs here, because he owns here. The first sign that something has changed comes when several executives' phones begin buzzing simultaneously. In the age of constant connectivity, most people ignore their phones during social events. But when your phone buzzes with an email marked urgent, contract termination notice, you tend to pay attention. Margaret Sinclair is the first to check her messages. Her face goes from confusion to concern to outright panic in the space of about 15 seconds. She tries to call her office, but it's past business hours. She tries to call her assistant, but the call goes to voicemail. Finally, she calls her company's after-hours legal helpline. The conversation lasts about 2 minutes, during which Margaret's expression transforms from panic to complete devastation. She hangs up and immediately begins scanning the room, looking for other executives who might be experiencing similar revelations. Thomas Bradford is having his own crisis 3 tables away. The International Development Division he manages has just lost its exclusive partnership with Hayes International Properties, a relationship that accounted for 70% of his department's annual revenue. More importantly, Thomas has just realized that his company's biggest client, their most important partner, their most crucial business relationship is controlled by the same man he helped humiliate 20 minutes ago. Janet Morrison, the chief financial officer who laughed the loudest at Elliot's supposed delusions of grandeur, is now staring at her phone in complete shock. Her company's credit facility, a $200 million line of credit that keeps their operations running, has just been called in for immediate payment. The lender? Hayes Financial Services, a subsidiary of Hayes Luxury Properties. One by one, phones across the room begin buzzing. Contracts terminated. Partnerships dissolved. Credit facilities called. Exclusive agreements voided. And in every single case, the executing party is some variation of Hayes Luxury Properties, Hayes International, Hayes Financial Services, or one of the dozen other companies in Elliot's portfolio. But the absolute masterpiece of this corporate symphony is what's happening to Richard Collings. Richard, remember, was the ringleader. The man who first suggested Elliot didn't belong at the party. The executive who called hotel security to have Elliot removed. Richard is currently holding court near the champagne fountain, regaling a group of admirers with his heroic tale of maintaining event security. His phone hasn't just buzzed. It's been ringing constantly for the past 5 minutes. First his office, then his assistant, then his company's general counsel, then the senior partners at his firm. Finally, Richard excuses himself from his audience to take what he assumes will be a routine business call. The conversation lasts exactly 37 seconds, during which Richard's entire world collapses. Meridian Group, Richard's real estate firm, doesn't just have a consulting contract with Hayes Luxury Properties. They have 17 different agreements spanning everything from joint ventures to exclusive listing arrangements to international development partnerships. The total value of these relationships represents roughly 40% of Meridian Group's annual revenue. All 17 contracts have just been terminated, effective immediately, without notice, and completely legally, thanks to clauses that allow termination for conduct detrimental to the business relationship. But it gets worse for Richard. Much worse. The Kingsworth Hotel, where he's currently standing, where he just had a man ejected for supposedly not belonging. Richard's company, Meridian Group, has their corporate offices on floors 22 through 26 of this building. They've had this lease for 8 years. It's their headquarters, their business address, their professional identity. The building is owned by Hayes Property Management. Richard's firm has exactly 30 days to vacate the premises. As the reality of what's happening spreads through the room, the atmosphere begins to shift dramatically. The confident laughter from earlier is replaced by worried whispers. Groups of executives are huddling around phones, trying to understand how their business relationships could have collapsed so suddenly and so completely. And that's when Elliot Hayes makes his entrance. Not the humiliated man who was escorted out 20 minutes ago, but the real Elliot Hayes. The billionaire CEO. The owner of Hayes Luxury Properties. The man who controls more luxury real estate than any other individual on the East Coast. He walks through the crowd flanked by his security team, and this time, every eye in the room follows his movement with a very different kind of attention. This isn't the curious staring from before. This is the focused, terrified attention of people who are beginning to understand that they've made an unforgivable mistake. The hotel's head of security approaches Elliot with visible nervousness. "Mr. Hayes, sir, I want to personally apologize for the earlier misunderstanding. My staff should have verified your identity before taking any action." Elliot nods graciously. "No need to apologize. Your staff was following instructions from someone they believed had authority. But now I need you to follow some instructions from someone who actually does have authority." He hands the security chief a piece of paper. It's a list of 17 names, the same names Elliot recited to Sarah Chin during his phone call outside. "These individuals are no longer welcome at this event," Elliot says in a voice that carries clearly across the suddenly quiet ballroom. "Please escort them from the building." This is where the real power shift happened. Stick around and subscribe, because the next part isn't just justice, it's a masterclass in consequences that will leave you speechless. Do you think public humiliation should always be answered with public consequences, or should Elliot have handled this privately? What happens next is something that will be talked about in business schools, corporate boardrooms, and industry conferences for decades to come. Because Elliot Hayes doesn't just get his revenge, he delivers a lesson in power, respect, and consequences that transforms not just individual careers, but an entire industry's understanding of who truly holds influence in their world. As the hotel security team begins moving through the crowd with their list of 17 names, you can actually watch the social dynamics of the room shift in real time. The same executives who were laughing and congratulating each other 20 minutes ago are now backing away from the targeted individuals as if their professional disgrace might be contagious. Richard Collings is the first to be approached. He's still on his phone, desperately trying to understand how his company's relationship with Hayes Luxury Properties could have collapsed so suddenly when two security guards appear at his side. "Mr. Collings," one of them says professionally, "we need you to come with us." Richard looks up from his phone call, and for the first time tonight his arrogant confidence cracks. "There must be some mistake," he stammers. "I'm Richard Collings from Meridian Group. I have every right to be here." That's when Elliot's voice cuts through the crowd, clear and commanding. "Mr. Collings, you had every right to be here when you were a partner in 17 different business relationships with my company. As of 8 minutes ago, those relationships no longer exist. Neither does your invitation to this event." The ballroom has gone completely silent now. 500 of the most powerful people in the real estate industry are watching Richard Collings, a man who built his entire professional reputation on inherited wealth and social connections, being escorted toward the exit by the same security team he summoned to remove someone else. But Elliot isn't done with Richard yet. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elliot says, his voice carrying the natural authority of someone who's used to commanding boardrooms, "I'd like to take a moment to clarify some confusion that occurred earlier this evening." He steps toward the center of the room, and the crowd parts naturally to give him space. This isn't the man who was humiliated and ejected 30 minutes ago. This is Elliot Hayes in his element, a billionaire CEO who's about to deliver one of the most memorable speeches in corporate history. Some of you may have witnessed my earlier exit from this ballroom. Some of you may have even participated in it. I want you all to know that I don't take those actions personally. But I do want to use this moment as a teaching opportunity. Margaret Sinclair, who's been watching Richard's escort with growing horror, realizes her name is also on that security list. She tries to move toward the nearest exit, but the crowd has formed a natural amphitheater around Elliot, and leaving now would mean pushing through hundreds of people who are hanging on every word. "You see," Elliot continues, "there seems to be some confusion about who belongs in this room tonight. So let me provide some clarity." He gestures broadly at the opulent ballroom, the crystal chandeliers, the panoramic city views through floor-to-ceiling windows. "This building? Hayes Property Management owns it. The company being celebrated tonight? Hayes Luxury Properties, that's mine. The record-breaking profits we're supposedly here to toast? I generated them. The international partnerships that make half your deals possible? I created them." Thomas Bradford, the head of international development who earlier suggested Elliot should show them to the kitchen, is now visibly sweating. His phone has been buzzing constantly, And he's just learned that his entire department's overseas operations depend on relationships that no longer exist. But more importantly, Elliot says, his voice gaining strength, there seems to be confusion about what qualifies someone to be in this room. Some of you apparently believe that belonging is determined by appearance, by assumptions about background, by unconscious or perhaps conscious biases about who could possibly have earned the right to be here. The silence in the room is now absolute. Even the service staff has stopped moving, sensing that they're witnessing something historic. So let me be very clear about what qualifies someone to be in this room tonight. It's not the color of your skin. It's not your family's wealth. It's not your social connections or your country club memberships or your Ivy League degrees. Elliot pauses, letting his words sink in before delivering the killing blow. What qualifies you to be in this room is results. Achievement. The ability to create value, generate profits, and build something lasting. And by those standards, the only standards that actually matter in business, I don't just belong in this room. I am the reason this room exists. That's when the security team reaches Margaret Sinclair. She tries to protest, tries to explain that there's been some misunderstanding, tries to claim ignorance about what happened earlier. But Elliot's voice cuts through her desperate explanations. Miss Sinclair, you were particularly enthusiastic about my removal earlier this evening. You even posted about it on social media. I believe your words were unexpected entertainment. I hope you understand that actions have consequences, especially when those actions involve publicly humiliating your ultimate employer. Margaret's face goes completely white. She hadn't considered that her social media posts might be monitored by corporate communications departments, or that joking about someone's humiliation might not be appropriate when that someone controls your professional future. As she's escorted toward the exit, Elliot addresses the crowd again. I want everyone here to understand what you've witnessed tonight. This isn't about revenge. This isn't about getting even. This is about standards. Thomas Bradford is next. As security approaches him, he tries a different strategy: immediate, groveling apology. Mr. Hayes, I want to sincerely apologize for any misunderstanding earlier. I had no idea. Elliot interrupts him with a raised hand. Mr. Bradford, you had no idea who I was? The CEO of the company that provides 60% of your department's annual revenue? The man whose signature appears on partnership agreements you reference in every board meeting? You had no idea? Thomas opens his mouth to respond, but Elliot continues. Or perhaps you knew exactly who I was, but you decided that knowledge was less important than participating in public humiliation for your own amusement? The security team doesn't wait for Thomas's answer. One by one, all 17 executives are identified and escorted from the ballroom. Each removal is accompanied by Elliot's calm, devastating commentary about their role in the evening's events and the professional consequences of their actions. But the masterpiece of the evening comes when Janet Morrison, the CFO who laughed loudest at Elliot's supposed delusions, tries to negotiate her way out of consequences. Mr. Hayes, she calls out desperately as security approaches, I'm sure we can work something out. My company is prepared to offer significant concessions to maintain our business relationship. Elliot looks at her with something that might almost be pity. Ms. Morrison, 30 minutes ago you thought the idea of me being a CEO was so absurd that you suggested I work in catering. Now you want to negotiate concessions to maintain a business relationship. He pauses, letting the irony sink in. Here's what I learned about you tonight. When you thought I was powerless, you were cruel. Now that you know I have power, you want to negotiate. That tells me everything I need to know about your character, and it's exactly why you're no longer welcome in my business ecosystem. As Janet is escorted out, her face a mixture of panic and humiliation, Elliot addresses the remaining crowd. I want everyone who's still here to understand something very important. What happened tonight wasn't about race, though race certainly played a role. What happened tonight was about respect. About the fundamental human dignity that every person deserves, regardless of their appearance or background. The ballroom, which started the evening with 500 guests, now holds about 480. The 17 individuals being escorted out represent millions of dollars in terminated business relationships, but more importantly, they represent a line that should never have been crossed. In business, we talk constantly about professional behavior, corporate culture, and industry standards. But somewhere along the way, some of us forgot that those concepts start with basic human decency. They start with treating every person you encounter with respect until they demonstrate they don't deserve it. Elliot moves toward the small stage where the evening speakers are supposed to deliver their presentations. But instead of the prepared remarks about quarterly profits and market expansion, he's about to deliver something far more powerful. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm supposed to give a keynote speech tonight about Hayes Luxury Properties' record-breaking year. About our expansion into new markets, our innovative partnerships, our vision for the future of luxury real estate. And I will still give that speech, because our success story deserves to be told. He reaches the microphone and adjusts it slightly, a small gesture that somehow commands even more attention from the captivated audience. But first, I want to tell you a different story. I want to tell you about a young man who 15 years ago was sleeping in his car, showering at truck stops, and making cold calls from fast food parking lots. A young man who was told by countless executives, investors, and industry leaders that he didn't have what it took to succeed in luxury real estate. The ballroom is so quiet you could hear a champagne flute drop. Some of those people told him he didn't have the right background. Others said he didn't have the right connections. A few were honest enough to say he didn't have the right skin color. But that young man had something that none of those critics could take away from him: the absolute refusal to accept other people's limitations. Elliot's voice gains intensity as he continues. That young man spent 5 years working 18-hour days, 7 days a week. He learned every aspect of the real estate business from the ground up. He studied market trends, financing structures, international regulations, and customer psychology. He failed more times than most people even try. But every failure taught him something new, made him stronger, made him smarter. The audience is completely absorbed now. This isn't just a speech, it's a masterclass in perseverance, determination, and the kind of success that transforms entire industries. And slowly, deal by deal, relationship by relationship, that young man built something extraordinary. Not just a company, but an ecosystem. A network of partnerships, investments, and collaborations that spans continents. A business empire that creates jobs, generates billions in economic activity, and sets the standard for excellence in luxury real estate. Elliot pauses, scanning the faces in the crowd. That young man's name is Elliot Hayes. And tonight you met him. The applause that erupts is unlike anything heard at a corporate event. This isn't polite business applause, this is recognition, respect, and perhaps a touch of awe from people who are beginning to understand exactly who they've been sharing a room with all evening. But Elliot raises his hand for silence, because he's not done yet. The 17 individuals who were just escorted from this building made a critical error in judgment tonight. They assumed that success, achievement, and belonging could be determined by appearance rather than accomplishment. They assumed that their positions gave them the right to humiliate someone they perceived as lesser. His voice hardens slightly. But here's what they failed to understand. In business, perception and reality are two very different things. Tonight, their perception was that I didn't belong here. The reality is that I own here. Their perception was that I was powerless. The reality is that I controlled their professional futures. Their perception was that they were untouchable. The reality is that nobody is untouchable when they forget basic human decency. Elliot steps back from the microphone for a moment, letting the weight of his words settle over the audience. Now, I want to be very clear about something. What happened tonight wasn't just about punishing bad behavior. It was about establishing a new standard for our industry. A standard that says professional success comes from talent, hard work, and results, not from who you know, what you look like, or how much money your family had when you were born. The crowd is hanging on every word now. Many of them are probably reconsidering their own assumptions, their own biases, their own professional behavior. From this day forward, every company, partnership, and business relationship associated with Hayes Luxury Properties will operate according to one simple principle: respect for human dignity comes first. Everything else, profits, expansion, market share, industry status, comes second. Elliot's voice rises to its crescendo. Because at the end of the day, business isn't about buildings or properties or profit margins. It's about people. And when we forget how to treat people with basic decency and respect, we lose the right to call ourselves professionals. The standing ovation that follows lasts for nearly 3 minutes. But more importantly, it represents a fundamental shift in how an entire industry thinks about leadership, respect, and professional standards. As the applause finally dies down, Elliot delivers his final message. To everyone who witnessed what happened here tonight, I want you to remember something. True power isn't about humiliating others or making people feel small. True power is about lifting others up, creating opportunities, and building something bigger than yourself. That's the kind of power that lasts. That's the kind of power that changes the world. The aftermath of that evening became legendary in business circles. The 17 executives who were terminated and escorted out never worked in luxury real estate again. Not because Elliot blacklisted them, but because their behavior became so widely known that no reputable firm would hire them. Richard Collings's company, Meridian Group, lost so much business that they had to declare bankruptcy within 6 months. Margaret Sinclair moved to a different city and changed careers entirely. Thomas Bradford's department was dissolved, and the company restructured to avoid further losses from the Hayes partnership termination. But the real impact of that evening went far beyond individual consequences. Elliot's speech went viral within hours, generating millions of views across social media platforms. Business schools began using it as a case study in leadership under pressure. Corporate training programs incorporated it into their diversity and inclusion curricula. More importantly, Hayes Luxury Properties stock price increased by 14% in the following week, as investors recognized that they weren't just backing a real estate company, they were supporting a leader who represented a new model of business excellence. The story became a symbol of something much larger than corporate revenge. It became a reminder that in a world where success is often measured by wealth and status, the most important measure of a person's worth is still how they treat others. And Elliot Hayes? He continued building his empire, but with a new understanding of his role as more than just a CEO. He became an advocate for meritocracy, a champion of diversity, and a living example that in business, as in life, respect and dignity are the foundations upon which everything else is built. If you believe respect should always outweigh prejudice and that actions have consequences regardless of who you think is watching, subscribe to this channel and share this story so more people can hear it, because lessons like this need to spread. Was Elliot too harsh in his response, or was this the only way to make them truly understand that respect and human dignity aren't negotiable, no matter how much power you think you have?